Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed. This is the 94th meeting that we've had in a row, and I want to thank all of the regulars and new people who are joining us today from all over the planet. And I'd like to remind people why we created this forum. And we did this in order to bring together people from the left, the right, from many different ideologies, many different language cultures, to actually have a dialogue around how do you create true peace, what is really going on in the world, and how do we take action in a coordinated manner in order to accomplish those goals. So thank you everyone again for joining us and for inviting your friends and organizations. I'm putting the agenda in the chat here for people on the Zoom. If you are on a different platform and you'd like to participate during the online discussion period, please go to schillerinstitute.com and you'll find the registration page right on the top. You go there, register, and you will get the Zoom link to hop on. So to start us off today, I'd like to have Helga Tsepp-LaRouche, who's the founder of the Schiller Institute, to lead off the discussion. Please go ahead, Helga.
Yes, hello to all of you. It is a breathtaking world where changes occur almost on a daily basis. So, let me try to situate what we are discussing today in the strategic situation. Now, the 18th of March for sure will be remembered in history as a fateful day because two major events occurred which both are potentially extremely good or extremely bad. First of all, that's the day where President Putin and President Trump had an almost 2-hour phone discussion. That was the second one, but it ended essentially a pause of 3.5 years where there was no direct connection between the United States and Russia, the two most powerful nuclear powers. So according to both readouts from the White House and the Kremlin, the discussion was very productive and a lot of follow-up is set up to occur, dealing with the Ukraine war, the Middle East crisis, and other topics. And, you can really see in the world who reacted positively to that, mainly representatives from the so-called global south, the developing sector, while from Europe came an absolute rejection of this discussion. Now, I think, what could be more positive than if the two most powerful nuclear powers start to have a return to diplomacy rather than war and escalation. So in my mind, any sane person should be highly happy about this event, even if it clearly does not yet settle the very multiple problems in the world, but it's a major, major first step in the right direction. Now, unfortunately, on the same day, the 18th of March, there was a historic vote in the German parliament, which got a two-thirds majority to change the constitution, to loosen up the so-called debt brake, not for investment in production and the real economy, but to basically open the sluices for a 400 billion military program with no cap, so it could go up all the way, and another 500 billion for infrastructure, of which a certain segment is also logistics for the military buildup. According to the Economic Daily Handelsblatt, this amounts at this point a sum of totally 1.7 trillion euros just for mainly military purposes. Now, obviously, this evokes bad memories from the standpoint of, when did Germany go into a militarization program the last time? And indeed, the last time there was such an outside of the budget creation of funds for militarization was with Hjalmar Schacht and the infamous MEFO bills, which is indeed the parallel to what is happening. Now, one can argue, that the Europeans are only reacting to the fact that they are left out of the discussion, but that is not the whole story, because obviously the argument of President Trump was that when his representative Rubin met with Foreign Minister Lavrov in Riyadh, they had to first establish, basic discussion between the two superpowers. And naturally, since the Europeans had not provided any initiative for a diplomatic approach to the Ukraine crisis, why would you invite somebody who clearly has not indicated that a peace solution is even in their strategic calculation? So this is now a situation where, in Germany, Merz, the chancellor candidate of the CDU-CSU, had run and won his election campaign with the promise that he would exactly not do that he would not loosen the debt brake. And then one day later, after he was elected, he turned around 180 degrees and said, yes, we will go this way because of the Russian threat. Now, you can actually argue that this is very much like a coup d'etat, even if it was done by the same person, Merz, who first promised no, and then one day later said yes, reversing the policy in such a draconian way. And, this is a complete scandal because, using the old parliament, which just was voted out, to get a two-thirds majority through, which he knew perfectly well, the new Bundestag parliament, he would not get the two-thirds majority. So they'd use this kind of parliamentarian trickery to get this through. Now, this forebodes, in my view, badly because, the voters are very upset. The people in Germany are horrified. Many people we had discussions with are completely flabbergasted how this could happen. And naturally, the European Union is now trying to get all the savings into a fund, into a savings and investment union to fund the militarization, which is even more scandalous. Now, obviously, this has a very strong reaction from Russia, where Maria Zakharova basically said this is a major transition into a path of accelerated militarization. Does this evoke a sense of déjà vu? And she says the main reason for that is the economic collapse in Germany, where Germany had a economic model which was very much based on cheap energy from Russia, and this is now because of the absence of cheap gas from Russia, it has left to an enormous internal collapse of the economy, which left them supposedly no alternative but to revert to a historically tested approach, militarization. Now, she says, they seem to have forgotten the consequences, the absolute collapse of the nation. And Friedrich Merz obviously indulged in unfounded assertions during the debate about a so-called alleged Russian-initiated war against Europe and a Russian threat. She says, I want to state that Russia has no intention of attacking Germany. If Germany asserts otherwise, such plans must lie with Germany itself. In any case, Berlin ought to call a spade a spade. And she says this is a return to historical revanchism, which is really horrible. Now, you should remember that the entire story about this demonization of Russia is based on the thesis that Russia is planning to attack, when they are done with Ukraine, they plan to attack Poland, and then first the Baltic states, then Poland, and then even other European states. Now, let me say this in the clearest possible terms. We could discuss the prehistory of the Ukraine war, which is not an unprovoked aggression from the side of Russia, but there are many time witnesses, from Jack Medlock, who was the Russian ambassador of the United States in Moscow in the time of the German unification and the end of the Cold War, and many others, Genscher. There are historical documents, videos, found in the National Archive in the United States, and I have these videos on hand, which absolutely crystally make clear that the promise was given to Russia not to expand NATO to the east. And we all know what happened. There were, in the meantime, 6 times expansion to the borders of Russia, leading to a reversed Cuban Missile Crisis. But I don't even want to discuss the prehistory of the Ukraine war, because if you now look, is there a threat from Russia? Well, Sakharova said absolutely no, but in talking to several top-ranking military experts, I'm absolutely certain that the argument that Russia is planning an attack on Europe is completely fraudulent, because there is not only not the intention, but even if you leave that argument aside, there is no capacity. Because even if Russia would mobilize all available troops, according to these military experts, the maximum amount of troops they could get together is 1.5 million, and that is by far not enough to attack Western Europe militarily. So the entire argument why this whole militarization has to be, because according to several secret services from Sweden, from Denmark, from Germany, an attack of Russia is to be expected by the latest 2029, bears any evidence whatsoever. And all the people who have made the argument that Russia is intending to attack Europe, they have not provided any evidence whatsoever. And I think this is a very important point to be stated. Now, the Bundesrat, that's the upper house, today confirmed the vote of the lower house, the Bundestag, and that means, it's now fully moving ahead. Now, let me just say that it is very clear that the European Union is falling apart over this. You have, on the one side, the coalition of the willing, that is primarily Great Britain, which is the leader of it, France with Macron, Germany, then the Baltic states, Poland, and the Scandinavians. But this is in absolute opposition to Hungary, Slovakia, but also Italy, Spain, and Portugal did not vote for the recent EU meeting where Kaja Kallas had proposed to get together another 40 billion to be sent to Ukraine. So the European Union is completely split and may actually disintegrate over this. But yesterday, military from 20 countries met in London, and Starmer had invited the coalition of the willing, and basically, so, it remains to be seen. They definitely don't want to send peace troops. It could be more, an effort to sabotage the ongoing effort to bring the Ukraine war to an end. Now, the situation on the ground in Ukraine, as you know, is really not much left of Ukraine, and Ukraine ability to mobilize the troops is coming to a soon an end, and the slaughter is just killing people for no good reason. Because of that, there is now a lot of talk about possible elections in Ukraine. For example, Oleg Tsaryov, a former Ukrainian parliamentarian who now lives in Crimea, has basically given an interview where he says that soon there may be a ceasefire, lifting of the martial law, elections, and then once martial law is election of a new leadership, and then that new leadership could be willing to sign a long-term agreement with Russia. And there is also, the obvious need to have a general amnesty of all the banned parties and the leaders who have been either jailed or went into exile or are in some other condition. They must all be rehabilitated, and there must be free elections. That is absolutely in the cards and should be pursued. Now, the only other major crisis I want to address is naturally the situation in the Middle East, where, if the Ukraine situation is very fragile, but at least some hope exists that this can be settled. The situation in the Middle East is, according to several witnesses from the region, very bad. While what the Trump statement were in public, there were some positive elements in it. But in practice, there is no question that a policy of maximum pressure is being asserted. The attacks by the Hamas and Houthis are blamed on Iran, which obviously Iran is denying. Whatever the truth there is difficult to find out. The letter by President Trump to Khamenei in the tone is 80% threatening. And, obviously, this is very iffy. Now, on the other side, there were military maneuvers between Russia, Iran, and China of the fleet. Then there was a meeting, a political high-level meeting in Beijing, where the deputy foreign minister of Iran participated together with Russians. So there is clearly this Russian and Chinese element in the background, but it is a gray zone how this may end up. Naturally, Israel violated since about 10 days the ceasefire, and on the renewed IDF ground operation in Gaza, more than 1,000 Palestinians were killed, mostly children and women, and the threat to displace 2 million Palestinians into other countries is still absolutely on the table. So the situation, therefore, is regarded by many people in the region as absolutely terrible. So that all means that if you look at the situation, it's extremely fragile and fluid. While President Trump has clearly shown some leadership in going back to diplomacy with Russia in that respect, the Russians continued the attacks on Ukraine. Ukraine continued attacks into Russia, so it's not yet in safe areas. Also, there are many people inside the United States, even from the MAGA camp, who do not want another war in the Middle East. And the bombing of the United States of Yemen found many critics. And the situation, therefore, inside the United States is also not stable, and can really lead to a blowback if certain policies are not remedied. All of that, the sum of it, means that we absolutely have to redouble and 10 times over increase our efforts to move the world in a completely different domain, namely that of a new international security and development architecture, because only if you change the present geopolitical regime that you can have any hope to address all the major issues, primarily the fact that we are sitting on a time bomb, which is the pending financial collapse. Now, the German situation cannot hold, and this effort to replace the green bubble of the Green Deal, which utterly failed, with a new bubble, the militarization bubble, uh, while the real economy, the bottom is falling out, cannot succeed. And it is the estimate of top experts that if it would come to a military confrontation between the United States and Iran, the United States would lose, not necessarily for military reasons, but because it would lead to a complete collapse of the international financial system. So that is the powder keg on which we are sitting, and that is why we have to redouble our efforts to put this new security and development architecture on the table. Because also, if you look at the peace movement in Europe, the reaction to what happened in Germany, you had some demonstrations, but this was a few hundred people here, a few hundred people there, but nothing even approximating enough to have an impact. So therefore, I'm calling on the participants of the IPC, to please study our approach, because it is my uh, deepest belief that only if we change the paradigm completely, that we can avoid a catastrophe. Thank you.
Thank you, Helga. I'll make sure to include the link to the 10 principles that you've brought up, and I'll include that in the chat here for people to read and look over. I think it's definitely important what we're doing here right now, given just the lack of intensity that's needed amongst many groups and organizations. I think we need to really vamp up what we're doing across the globe. Just in what you've laid out today. So thank you so much for that, Helga. I'd like to go to Ray McGovern, who's a close collaborator in the IPC, and he's a former CIA analyst and co-founder of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Thank you so much for joining us, Ray. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Can I be heard?
Yes, you
Am
can.
I can. Okay, thank you for inviting me back, and thank you, Helga, for that nice kind of intelligence roundup. I do hope that as the years go by, a new chancellor in Germany will invite you to brief him or her daily with the chancellor's daily brief. It was very good and very pointed. Let me pick up on some of those notions here. Merz is saying Germany is back. Oh my God. And your explication of what happened in the Bundestag yesterday and the Bundesrat today is chilling. Now, I spent decades and decades putting myself into the shoes of Russian and earlier Soviet leaders. Russia is back is not something that they're going to greet with equanimity. Ironically, NATO was set up, as its first Secretary General explained, Lord Ismay from Britain. It was set up to keep Russia out of Europe, to keep America in Europe, and keep Germany down. Whoa. Now, Germany, at least rhetorically and economically, is trying to come up. My God, well, how do the Russians feel about that? Afraid. They've been through this. 27 million Russians perished in World War II. They've been there, done that. They see people like Hadalena Abaya Boch that don't know a thing about war, and many of her associates as well. So what's the difference today? Oh, there is a big difference, okay? Right now, the US and Russia are not at loggerheads anymore. They are talking, okay? And they would see a mutual danger in Germany going off on the path that Merz has taken. Now, Merz, who is he? I mean, he's part of the what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. And as I've coined this new acronym, I think I'll use it. It's become the military-industrial congressional intelligence media in all capital letters, okay? Media, academia, think tank complex. They're all together, and media is the linchpin. That's why so many Germans were able to be bamboozled this week, in my view, into not protesting about this return to what they know from their school books, at least, was the disaster in the 1930s. So where does that leave us? That leaves us with a situation where there's a mutual interest on the part of the Russians, and I dare say on the part of the Americans, not to let this get out of hand. Okay. Now you quoted Zakharova, Maria Zakharova, and she's quite right. We need to call spades spades. That I would agree with. Let's talk about what has existed between Russia and the United States since the Ukraine crisis erupted into war. Okay, it was a Vertrauensbruch, a complete breakdown in trust. Now, there had been trust built up between Obama and Mr. Putin. Okay, when was that? That was in 2013, when Putin pulled Obama's chestnuts out of the fire on Syria. Okay, there was a false flag attack, and Obama was under great pressure to attack Syria openly, not through just covert action. And Putin enabled the Syrian government, or persuaded them, to destroy all their chemical weapons. Now, Putin himself spoke then, September 2013, of growing trust, the coin of the realm, trust between the U.S. and Russia, and also personally between President Obama and him, President Putin. Now, what happened? Well, Obama was so weak that he gave the neocons 6 months to violate that trust and overturn the government in the most blatant coup in history. Advertised 2.5 weeks before it happened on YouTube in Kiev, Ukraine. Trust plummeted. Then there were several, betrayals. The Russians call these betrayals. That's true. These were betrayals. You had the Minsk agreements, where the Chancellor of Germany and the head of France admitted later that these were just bogus agreements to allow Ukraine to arm up to NATO standards. And look at them now, says Angela Merkel. Well, guess what? Angela Merkel, I'm convinced she has some sort of latent conscience, because what she's done recently. Let me see if I have that little. Yeah, here it is. She said, "Look, partly U.S. and Western policy was responsible for what happened in Ukraine. What? You must be in Putin's pocket. You must be worse still, a Putin versteher." Can you see that? All right. Now, I got this about 7 years ago in Germany, and I said, "Oh my God, Putin versteher." That means somebody who tries to understand Putin. That's a good thing, right? So, don't do it, friend. No, it's a pejorative. That means you're in Putin's pocket. Now, even Angela Merkel now, just this week, has been saying that's wrong. For God's sake, we have to understand the people that we consider as rivals or enemies. And her chief military advisor a brigadier general, has said precisely the same thing. Call me a Putin versteher, if you will. I just want to understand what's going on. So these are positive things. Now, with respect to that meeting between Putin and Trump on the, what was it, the 18th or the 18th of March. This is what's important about that. Not much changed in the Russian position, but they did agree to have a 30-day ceasefire, or with respect to military attacks on energy infrastructure. Sorry about that. So what does that mean? Well, that means that Putin is willing not to rub it in from his position of strength, from his position of overweening strength in Ukraine, but he wants to deal. Why does he want to deal? Well, there's no better source than Peskov, his personal representative, his PR guy. And what did Peskov say the day after the conversation? Now listen closely, please, because this is entirely new and entirely missed in the Western press. Here it is. Trump and Putin, quote, trust each other, end quote. They want to put relations between the countries back on track. There is a, quote, solid will by the two presidents to restore ties, and that the leaders, quote, understand each other very well. What does this mean? End quote. What does this mean? My God, that means that there is a burgeoning of trust, something absent since the coup in Kiev, and really absent since Obama said, or Putin said, trust Obama and I trust each other. This is big. This is really big. What does that mean? Well, when they get together, not so much in Saudi Arabia this coming Monday, but they're already together talking on the phone, right? Sometimes they talk for an hour and a half. Now, there's a way that Putin can talk sense into Trump and say, look, can you go back to the original concept of NATO? I mean, you kept us out. You're in, sort of, but you will got to keep the Germans down, right? So what's going on here? What's going on? The military-industrial complex, the economy is growing crazy. They're going to raise armies and say, look, we got to put an end to this together. We're together now in a way that we trust each other and in a way that has not been the case for many, many years. So what about this project to put medium range and intermediate range missiles in Germany next year? My God, what was that all about? That was all about this. The Germans and the Americans, Biden administration, could not get NATO allies to agree that this was a good idea. So at the NATO summit in Washington, they got off to a separate room, right? And they did this little deal where the salutary effects of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty would be completely vitiated by putting nuclear missiles in Germany. Now, they're already possibly in Romania and Poland. There's some dispute as to whether they'll go into Ukraine itself if that eventuates. But my God, nuclear whistles back in Germany. So my prediction is this: the situation has changed since NATO was formed. There's a mutual interest between Russia and the U.S. to keep Germany from destroying Europe again. The Germans are very slow to come to their senses, but there are enough people who are saying, sei doch vernünftig, for God's sake, Gottes Willen, be reasonable here. Now we're losing the Americans. Who else we got? Keir Starmer? Give me a break, okay? So what the Russian leaders are now calling the pygmies in charge of most of Europe will have their comeuppance. And it may take months, it may even take a year or two, but their people are going to be educated only if, and that's where the media comes in the Mickey Mat. Only if we, to the degree we can, and people like us, can speak truth to power and speak truth to citizens, our fellow citizens. Find ways to say, hey, look, you want another war? You want another rearmed Germany? I mean, what are these people posing as when they have no real power? So I'll just close with this observation. It was made by Ayn Rand, and I've been warned, don't quote Ayn Rand. Okay, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to do it anyway. This is what she wrote. Very brief. It is possible to ignore reality. Got this? It is possible to ignore reality, but it is not possible to ignore the consequences of ignoring reality, okay? So these people in Europe who think they have a major role to play only because they're making lots of money about it for the military-industrial complex, they can't ignore the reality that the Russians not going to permit this. And for the first time in decades, the U.S. has an interest in making sure that all hell doesn't break loose in Germany or in Europe itself, and will cooperate with this new trust, as Peskov, the Putin spokesman, has talked about, in a way that has not been the case before. Merz, well, he can go back working for BlackRock, making tons of money. He has no business leading a peaceful Germany. I'll close with that.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Ray. That is absolutely correct. Thank you for saying that. And thank you so much for your analysis as well, and what your views are on what's happening right now in Europe. I'd like to kind of switch gears here, and there's a video that we have, which was submitted by Ambassador Dr. Manuel Hassassian. He's the Palestinian Authority ambassador to Denmark, who we had the opportunity to do an interview with him just the other day. So I want to bring up that short interview that was done. Do we have that there, Dave?
Hello, this is Tim Rush with the Schiller Institute in Washington, D.C. On March 19th. It is my great honor to have with me Ambassador Manuel Hassassian, Palestinian ambassador to Denmark, who has been one of the featured speakers today at an advocacy summit of the Churches for Middle East Peace. I want to ask Ambassador, thank you very much for joining me.
It's my pleasure, sir.
Wanted to ask you what message you brought to the Assembly today and how the recent events, horrific events, of the breakdown of the ceasefire and the renewed slaughter in Gaza, how to react to that and how to try to move forward despite this setback.
Well, actually, you know, we have to understand that the current situation in Gaza is unacceptable, and this naked aggression against our people should stop. I came here with a message for the church leaders to strengthen the words of peace and justice, and to work diligently with the respective governments to put pressure on Israel to stop this war, and to go back basically to peace negotiations, to strike out our differences, you know, in a peaceful way rather than through arms and bombs and what have you. Violence always breeds violence, and for that simple reason we have reached a resolution that military solution to this conflict is no solution. So the sooner the better. We have the dust should settle down, we should have peace, and life goes on. And in order for people to prosper, basically, we need to promote certain kind of policies that could be convenient for all parties, because that's the way you flourish, you advance, and you overcome political jingoism. And of course, since you are interviewing me from the Schiller Institute, I always talk about the Oasis Plan, how it could play a very imperative role in bridging the gaps politically by more or less trying to focus on development, and by development we can overcome this narrow ideology perceptions that negate each other. So the synthesis movement in this is the fact that when we approach, our conflict, not only from a political conflict or cultural or religious conflict, but if we think as the glass is half full, we search for common grounds. After all, national interests, economic interests, bode well in trying to create political stability.
I wanted to just add one question there. The program that's been advanced from the Arab countries, particularly through Egypt recently, do you see a way to, first of all, how do you evaluate that? And second, is there a way to broaden it so that the broader focus of the Schiller Institute's Oasis Plan could be integrated and bring it to a larger context?
Yes, the Palestinian Authority has its own plan for the reconstruction of Gaza, as you know, and it bodes well with that of the Egyptian plan. But we also believe that there should be an international dimension to the progress of development. And in order to have that dimension, you need people who are neutral on this conflict, who just come in, and shoulder the responsibility of taking off with the process of reconstruction and development on the economic level, with the mentality of pure scientific perspective. And as it is laid out in the Oasis Plan, I think this could be a very plausible plan that could integrate within the Egyptian and the Palestinian plan when we talk about the day after in Gaza. And therefore, we could give that international dimension to it, where it becomes more legitimate, more acceptable by the international community, to see the international dimension being infused, basically, within this overall comprehensive plan of reconstruction that could be acceptable to all. And I don't think the Americans would object to that, neither the Europeans, because the Oasis Plan has been spread all over Europe. And I myself, I have been participating in so many of your conferences and talking about this, whether in Denmark or in Palestine. I've done many interviews, and you are one of those who interviewed me from Copenhagen. So yes, I do believe that the international dimension of progress and development through economics, and there are testimonies for what the Oasis Plan has done and achieved.
Well, we thank you very much for that. I should tell you that we have been very active on Capitol Hill discussing the Oasis Plan as the advance, as sort of the forward, what creates the community of future benefits that can facilitate the immediate requirements in terms of halting the killing. Mm-hmm. And particularly on the Senate, we found very interesting responses, including among Republicans, because back in the 1960s, mm-hmm. it was former President Eisenhower who adopted a water for peace approach with a very detailed program, got the support of President Johnson. So it was a bipartisan effort. And 1 week before the Six-Day War, in June of 1967, there was a meeting in Washington, D.C. of 6,400 delegates from something like 70 countries on a water for peace program. And it got derailed basically because of dynamics unleashed by the Six-Day War. Well, so today we believe that we can pick that up. Exactly.
Inshallah.
And we very much embrace everything that you're doing, and thank you very much.
If we believe in God's will and with our resilience that conflict cannot sustain itself, but peace can be a permanent peace. And permanent peace comes with mutual reciprocity, with mutual respect, with mutual understanding that peace and security in the Middle East cannot be achieved.
Unfortunately, the video cut off at a certain point, but I just want to finish what the ambassador was saying. We have the transcript. He says, if we believe in God's will and with our resilience that the conflict cannot sustain itself, but peace can be a permanent peace. And permanent peace comes with mutual reciprocity, with mutual respect, with mutual understanding that peace and security in the Middle East cannot be achieved unless the Palestinians have their own independence. And in order to have that, and in order to promote peace and the sustainability and longevity of peace, we need to be partners in economics, in trade relationships, and in developing our natural resources for the benefit of all. So I just want to thank His Excellency Ambassador Professor Dr. Hassasian for sending in this video to the IPC today. This was very enlightening and important to hear the views from where you're coming from. So thank you again. So next I'd like to go to Fernando Garzon, who is an urban architect, executive director of the Ecuadorian-Palestinian Union, professor at universities in Ecuador, and a consultant on development and land use planning for international organizations, and also a regular on the International Peace Coalition. And thank you so much for joining us, Professor Garzon.
Muy buenos días, buenas tardes, buenas noches.
Good day, good afternoon, good evening to people who are listening to me. So I'd like to give you a large greetings for this opportunity to share with you with such distinguished people and with the other speakers. I'm going to give you an idea of what we have done in practice and what has been stated just now. The ambassador, Palestinian ambassador who spoke just before me, because it gives me a framework for some of the areas related to the work and what we could call reconstruction, but also the idea of peaceful unification. That is to say, a permanent peace based on planning, which would also guarantee a process of increased participation of society as a whole in development. Very well, then, what I would like to do is to specify a couple of the aspects which are involved. What are the general outlines for a ceasefire and a just peace, a permanent one, as has been pointed out, in a Palestine, which is currently occupied? What this implies is we have to have in mind the development and reconstruction, which must be an integral whole. For example, we have to have reconstruction, and this is a very important aspect of some of the proposals which have come from the Arab League, from Egypt, which has been mentioned as well, and also from the Palestinian Authority itself and other organizations which are directly affecting the circumstances around this discussion. But it's evident that reconstruction cannot be excluded from the overall concept of development. All reconstruction in a specific area, that is to say Gaza, can't be done in isolation from consideration of regional development. Therefore, what is done in terms of reconstruction has to lay the basis for the proposal for overall development. That's one of the crucial elements to keep in mind. The other crucial element is the issue of governability. It can't be any development without the active presence of the main actors, that is to say, the ones that belong in that area, the population, and therefore its institutional representations which are appropriate for that population. So we're talking here about political, legitimate established political representation in Gaza. And there's also aspects to this, such as in Jordan, because you cannot isolate the development in one region from that of what's going on in other countries, and to not incorporate the totality of the region and the populations of the whole area, of all of Palestine. And obviously, as has been noted on many occasions, the issue of security, there has to be a sustainable, permanent peace in the region. And there has to be a regional focus, but it has to as well understand that the central of this regional development, in fact, not only of Israel, of Lebanon, of other countries, including Egypt, it's very important to keep this in mind. In the context where we now is a world market, there is a multipolarity which is an emerging worldwide. There's clearly an evidence for an preferential organization, not only with regard to territories of reconstruction, but reconstruction from the standpoint of the totality of the system for society. This also implies a kind of preferential treatment with relations in the global south and those that are closest to the Palestinian people. So that establishes an overall approach which we consider important to have in mind with regard to these processes which we're talking about. Now, for this, a baseline, which is elementary, which unfortunately which is unfortunately a point of a critical point, which is, that is to say, the United Nations has provided information, which is important to keep in mind, because in May of 2024, there were 137,000 destroyed structures. That is to say, completely not occupiable. That's a very large percentage of the structures of Gaza. We're talking about 135 housing units. That is to say, reconstruction related to Gaza has got to resolve this problem. This has proportions which by July 5th, which was more than 73% of the structures of Gaza. And so the capabilities of people being able to live, have habitable surroundings, is currently being destroyed continuously because of the confrontation which is going on in the region right now. So this is catastrophic situation is one that we face. These are the conditions of life which the population is living through. This provides a context that we have to keep in mind, because there is information also that the roads, about 68% of them are pretty much destroyed, are impassable. So we're talking about a reconstruction that clearly involves rebuilding the entire highway system, not just in the urban areas, but also in the environment, which are rural or in the countryside, taking into account that there's that huge percentage of housing which has been destroyed. Now, by January of 2025, 92% of all housing units have been destroyed. This is horrendous, requiring reconstruction in a territory, creates circumstances which are really, truly, truly complex. We have to keep this in mind, because this creates a context which is the result of a process of violation of human rights, of, I would say, not only genocide, as South Africa has stated, but a terroricide, which is a concept that allows us to include not only the destruction of the population, the murder of the population, but also the destruction of nature itself, of the land and everything on it. So it's important as well to mention another aspect which I think is quite interesting and important. We've talked about the Oasis plan proposed by the Schiller plan, which is a truly beautiful proposal of the Oasis plan to create we're dealing with 95% of the water which is not potable. This water problem has to be solved. There is no water for domestic consumption. This was related to diseases of children, and in fact, the amount of supply of water, even during stable times, to call it that, when there wasn't a conflict, a military conflict, there was at most 5 hours of availability every 3 days. So 90% of the water, access to water, is in the private sector, which is an Israeli private company which has broken all of the agreements, all of the norms established, the Oslo agreements at the end of the last century. This gives us an idea of the features related to water issues are also catastrophic. Let's provide a couple of other aspects of this, of what we have to reconstruct. We have to plan around all of this. We have to have security and development as well in these regions. We all know that the issue of the great deposits of natural gas and oil, which are off the coast in Gaza, and even continental Gaza, and also in the West Bank as well. This is a fact which is well known and which there are 30 billion cubic meters of natural gas. This is billions of dollars worth, which belongs to the Palestinians, and this has got to be part of our development proposal. So there are similarly other elements which establish the basis for a reconstruction project and a long-term development project. We have to take these resources into account, and they do belong to the Palestinians, and should be part of the proposals of how to sustain the development of financing and so on. So, if we look at the main principal actors involved we were talking about, we have a framework which is necessary to look at in all of this. We all know, you all know, that Beijing, which through the Chinese government has proposed that the Palestinian organizations such as Fatah and Hamas should reach an agreement with regard to what their joint proposal is for reconstruction, and also for what the whole future of Palestine should be. So what they are proposing is how to maintain the proposal for the establishment of a Palestinian state, and this is Resolution 194 of the United Nations that we're talking about. We're talking about a temporary government based on national consensus. That summarizes the idea of the governability of a territory based on the actual presence of those who have been affected by this process and who belong on that actual territory. And of course, the siege of Gaza must be lifted, and there has to be humanitarian and medical help provided as well. So with this, then we could specify some of the outline of planning required. This includes political, territorial, and other aspects. So what we're saying is there has to be respect for the territorial sovereignty, for the self-determination and the unity of the Palestinian people, recognition, total recognition of the Palestinian state by the United Nations. That is to say, the possibility, the need to have a world conversation among equals. The Arab League support is fine and good, and that of Egypt as well, but the role involved has to be of the Palestinian state, which must be recognized to have a discussion among equals to settle their own future and destiny. This goes along with a question of planning of not only Gaza for reconstruction, but also the West Bank. This idea of that it is an integral unit, which the Oasis Plan talks about as well, the idea of resolving the problem of the lack of water. This is a regional proposal which is beneficial to all of the countries in the region. And therefore, to conclude, because I know we have limited time, which has been provided for us, so this management of these resources goes along with a global plan of rehabilitation and reconstruction of the ground transportation, and this leads us to the issue of financing, taking account of not only the resources which the Palestinian territory itself has, but also the support of especially of the Global South, the importance of the BRICS and its new development bank, the banking and other capabilities which exist in Asia. These are decisive so that this process of commitment, which the Palestinian people can assume, does not become an eternal debt, which then leads to conditionalities. And this is what are often the proposals that come from the International Monetary Fund, well known to all of you. So with this, I wanted to put on the table the proposals for peace, And we have given a priority to those that must arise from the Palestinian people and that are legitimate representatives. We know that there are other proposals. This idea of what Trump has proposed, this is unfortunately is an offense to common sense, saying that he would take control of everything. This is a gentleman who knows how to deal with certain subjects, but also he's looking out for his own interests. There is also, in fact, I've mentioned the proposal of the Palestinian Authority and the United Nations. They propose certain approaches, which are certain values, such as to reestablish trade and industry, dealing with health as well, with $600 billion and things of that sort. The case of Egypt, which is talking about $58 billion investment. So there are some proposals. So very well then, this allows us to conclude that the process of reconstruction then requires integral development, not only of the Palestinian territory per se, but without the Israeli military presence that distorts everything, and it has to be regional, and that a regional peace and a just peace can only be based on respect for development and dignity of the people. That's my contribution to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando Garzon, for that really excellent display of your expertise, and very much appreciated as an urban architect and builder. Hearing your views on how to make this successful, I think, is very important. So thank you again for that. We've actually been getting, you probably already know this, we've been getting a number of engineers and people who, are thinking about tangibly how to make this project, the Oasis plan, really work, and what the layout and bill of materials will be. So I'm sure we'll be in more dialogue about this. But I'd like to bring in Marcia Mary Baker, who's on the editorial board of the Executive Intelligence Review. She is also an expert in working with farmers in the United States and around the world, and she's worked on many, many, many development projects, and is an excellent speaker to these ideas. Thank you so much for joining us, Marcia.
Well, greetings to everyone. And as it happens, I am very glad to have the honor of following up the spirit of what Ambassador Hassasian had to say, and the concrete and wise points made by Professor Garzon. I'm going to follow up with a short illustrated briefing on some of the economic geography of the region at large that we are so concerned about, given the devastation, the genocide, and what is acutely in need of rectification. So let me just get right to it. And I'll start with a NASA Earth that Gaza, the entire Transjordan area, and I don't have to point it out, is right in the middle of the world's desert, stretching from West Africa all the way into China with the Gobi, the Taklamakan, and so forth. So that certainly puts us in a regional frame of mind. And so next, I want to go to the immediate region, and you'll see where the Transjordan is on the eastern side of the Mediterranean there. But please look over to Egypt, and that's the big triangular shaped historic delta of the Nile. And it's right, we start with Egypt for all the reasons that have been mentioned. Earlier this month, Egypt released its plan about reconstruction in Gaza. The Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority, the famous Palestinian hydrologists for decades have had excellent plans. They've been thwarted. But Egypt is at work on reclaiming the desert, creating new cities, And so this is my point of what there is going on that we can bring to bear. And that what's happened is you see the Nile and the green area of the Nile and the delta of vegetation. In fact, a team of Egyptian experts working with some young researchers in Boston has mapped all of Egypt, I think, under the tutelage of Farouk El-Baz, an Egyptian American who is a remote sensing expert who worked on the Apollo project. He's an expert on the moon. And they've figured out where is the best area for agriculture if you can bring water, because Egypt is so import dependent on wheat and so crowded along the Nile. So then they have moved on many parts of Egypt. But let me zoom in with the next photo from NASA of what you see, that on the left was the desert west of that green Nile Delta in an area they call the New Delta Project. There's desert in 2018. And on the right, you see 2024. There's a little writing there that says new farmland. Over that period of time, what was brought to bear is putting in infrastructure of pipes and barrages and to control and direct limited water and apply it to that desert potential soil. It's not hopeless sand. And look at the green fields that are now growing things. The water came a little from the Nile, which is very scarce, but occasionally is surplus. And the most exciting thing is it's also coming from wastewater treated and a little desalination. And what happened is last year, the biggest wastewater treatment plant in the world was opened near Alexandria, and it has many kilometers of pipes going in to serve new farmland. The next three photos Dave will show are from the contractor's original plans a few years ago that now have been realized. Here's one here for this gigantic water treatment plant with its distribution of usable water. It also treats runoff of water that has been applied to fields. There are the three photos. The client for these are contracting company photos, and they were the client is the Defense Department of Egypt, in the tradition of real defensive nations around the world, like the West Point in the U.S. or the École Politique in France, build the basis for peace. So this thing is clear. You see in Egypt, these kinds of technologies are there. Whatever the exact plans, over how many years, over how many phases of Gaza, there's no technology problem. It's entirely the political spirit to act in the common interest. Before I leave Africa, keep in mind your map of deserts. I just want to say that there are other things of note. I can't help but note Tunisia, for example. In the next two photos, Tunisia, the Tunisian people are very proud that there's precision agriculture, that's the name of what it's called, in the southern highland area where water can be scarce, but if you use it with absolute GPS connected precision and use fertilizer the same way, and test all the time. Here's a young man in the field collecting data. Then you make use of your limited resources in a very high-tech way, in addition to needing plentiful new supplies of water and all that kind of thing. So that's what we have. Then I wanted just to go eastward, across the Arabian Desert, across Iran, into what's become a desert east of the Aral Sea, where for certain reasons over the decades, the feeder rivers down from the Himalayas, the Amu Darya, and the other Sir Darya, have become insufficient for the people. But look here, this is again terraforming, in other words, intervening in what you have to create a new environment. In Afghanistan, there is a little map you see here of Afghanistan, like a logo. And this is the Kush-Tepe Canal in northern Afghanistan in the Amu Darya River Basin. And it began in 2022 with terrible lack of resources because of the fierce economic warfare against Afghanistan after 2021 because of the sanctions and the seizure of their central bank reserves and all this kind of thing. But I'll show you a few photos from the National Development Corporation of Afghanistan. Here is some of the fleet used to start work on the canal. The canal will be 285 kilometers long, and it goes across 3 provinces. They requisitioned pickups and dump trucks and anything else and started work, and it's about between a third to a half finished. Fortunately, Uzbekistan technicians are helping out, and it's part of the what should be on the world agenda for international cooperation. Wouldn't Caterpillar like to be involved, for example? But there has been this economic warfare. Here's some of the people involved at one point in the canal, and you see some of the workers lined up. There's been ceremonies. It is rightly a point of pride, not only of Afghanistan, but the spirit behind the Kush-Tepe Canal is a major achievement in all Eurasia. When finished, it would allow over 500,000 hectares of wheat, for example, that would make Afghanistan once again self-sufficient in wheat, which it was till the 1970s and all of the decades of warfare and strife. And the particularly awful thing about the West is Washington, London, and Brussels refuse to help farmers who have absolutely ceased growing opium poppy in Afghanistan and need help to transition to other crops. But I'm saying that the ability to create benefit here in the form of water, there's also oil and gas in the region of northern Afghanistan, typifies the spirit in which we need to bring into Gaza. Finally, this is the Kush-Tepe Canal, and as I say, and the thing is, the river, like the Nile, is insufficient, but that's a topic for another discussion because you can move water on a continental basis. We should be doing that in North America out west with the North American water and power lines, and you can do it in Central Asia, but that's another topic. So one more photo of the project. There you see how they're moving ahead and building the infrastructure on the sidelines for the agriculture processing complexes, transportation, but the lack of resources is acute. So finally, we go to one of the most inspirational things, but very concrete, is that here's a map of China with the lighter areas being desert. And you see the scope of that. And the point we want to make about that is just this month, I think, is the 47th year of celebration in China of tree planting and making war against the desert with great success. So if you look at the next image, what happened is there were decades ago, over 40 years, as I said, were plans for what you could call shelter belts of tree planting, of grassland cultivation, and of actual productive farmland development. So beginning in the late 1970s, that was the area concentrated on. And then there's another area in and around Mongolia. In other words, it's to go to 2050. This is development, what you do now based on what you want in the future. Now, I won't dwell on this, but the area planted to trees in the last 40 years in China is pushing the whole total area of Portugal, if you want to get an idea, that was formerly desert. It's now in appropriate trees. And one way this was done was by the military, by the communities, and also just people going out and planting, as the next photo shows. But here is a guest group of planters. Look at the back of them, and you see the shelter belt going way off in the distance. These are volunteers from Africa, because this same shelter belt idea is in action, except for lack of resources, among 11 nations south of the Sahara. And here are African nationals working in China. And I end this quick review with another photo of another aspect of this, and that's science itself. What's been developed in China and elsewhere are drought-tolerant food plants, grassland plants, fodder, just anti-desert plant life that you can just beat back the sand dunes. This is a research photo. And of course, this is absolutely what's in order for the Transjordan. And I end by just saying what I won't go into. Some of the most fabulous technology is in places like northwest Saudi Arabia in the Midian mountains, where they're building a city, or hope to, Neom, to be very technologically, ecologically advanced and even have ski slopes. But if you take those construction methods, instead of building luxury operations, or in my own country, in Arizona, they have fabulously transferable technology, but it's being used to grow food for free trade, to bilk both domestic farmers elsewhere and farmers in our Western Hemisphere. They grow peppers and ship them by air. So that's another story too. But I think what's going on, especially you see it in Egypt, right there in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is our world priority. You see what we can do. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for that, Marcia. I actually would like to take your presentation and just have that as a short piece for distribution. That was amazing and really does demonstrate what can be done in the region. Wow. So thank you, Marcia, for going through that for us on this discussion today. I'd like to come back to Helga Zepp-LaRouche, to see if you have a response to Marcia or anybody else on the panel thus far.
Yes, I think this is great, because what Marcia demonstrated is that the military can have a useful purpose, and there are actually in every single country different traditions where either the military is serving the empire, like Samuel Huntington in his horrible 800-page book, The Soldier and the State, is describing, how soldiers are mercenaries and should increase their kill ratio and be efficient, and that goes always with empire, Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, British Empire, and whatever, as compared to a completely different notion of the military, which was introduced on the one side by the Prussian reformers, such people as Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and in France, the Monge brigades, where the idea is that the military has a bigger focus on the corps of engineers, and is actually drawn upon to constructively intervene. And I think that since our whole idea is that we, despite the fact that it doesn't look like it in Germany right now or in Europe, we still think that the way to convert the industry is not from physical economy into military production, which is going on in Germany right now, where they're taking VW plants and turning them into tank plants. This is perverse. It should be the other way around. You should take plants of the military industrial complex and convert them into productive tractors, and other things should be produced. And we have not given up on the idea that the way to use this enormous military industrial complex physical capacity to transform it into a peaceful production to reconstruct the world. And with that would go the idea of transforming the military. The military should only have a defensive nature. There is a certain legitimacy as long as we are in this crazy world where people think they have to kill each other. A certain amount of defensive army, strictly defensive, but then, convert the military into a corps of engineers where they could contribute to solve all of these problems you have just identified, where they have a very positive role. So maybe we can get other people in the discussion period to relate to that, because I think we need a much, much stronger intervention into the peace movement, because people, to just be against the war at this stage is not enough. You don't mobilize people, you don't show them a way out. But if you have a plan, peace through development, I think we can probably, hopefully, arouse more people's passion.
Exactly. No, thank you. Thank you for that, Helga. And I will make sure that we get some of this material out during the discussion period. I'd like to touch on looking for Dennis Fritz. I'd like to bring in Dennis Fritz to kind of start off the discussion period. If you have, are we going to say something? He's there. Great. Dennis Fritz, here we go. He's the director of the Eisenhower Media Network and is a retired U.S. Air Force Command Chief Master Sergeant. And thank you so much for joining us, Dennis Fritz. And, if you have anything to contribute to the discussion or responses to anything thus far, please go ahead.
Okay, from the words of my colleague at the Eisenhower Media Network, Ray McGovern, can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, all
Yes.
right. Well, for the sake of time, I'm going to keep my remarks very short, but I do want to comment on a couple of things that Helga said and then Ray McGovern said earlier. One of the things that Ray mentioned was trust. And then Helga mentioned about the history of the Russia-Ukraine war and some of the many experts that warned against the expansion of NATO. And one of those individuals that Helga mentioned was former Ambassador Jack Matlock. And I've mentioned this before in the past, and I want to mention this again for any folks that are new to this. Back in May of 2023, the Eisenhower Media Network put out a New York Times paid ad, May of 2023. And it talked about the U.S. to be a force for peace. And one of the signatures on there was Jack Matlock. And what we must understand, Jack Matlock was there. He was the ambassador for us from, I think, 1987 to 1991. So he was there. And so he was a signature to our New York Times paid ad in talking about, how we got to where we are now. Part of that, in fact, another signature, probably your international audience have heard about, for sure, domestically here in the United States, Jeffrey Sachs was a signature to that open letter, and as well as Colonel Larry Wilkerson, who was the chief of staff to Colin Powell at the State Department before then, when all this was taking place, when we said we would not expand 1 inch east. We had Larry Wilkerson, who was the special assistant at the time to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Pentagon, who was then Colin Powell, and he was there. And so these are individuals that know the history of saying that we will not expand NATO. Part of that letter as well is a timeline. And part of that timeline is when we said, if Russia, at the time USSR, would agree to the unification of East and West Germany, we will not expand NATO. But guess what? Back in 1996, as Ray has mentioned and Helga mentioned as well, our military industrial complex, as a money-making machine, And they started lobbying Congress here in the United States that, hey, we must expand NATO. That is the military-industrial complex in 1996. Then in 1999, unfortunately, we admitted Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic, I'm sorry, at the time, into NATO. And then in 2014, the U.S. backed the overthrow of the president of Ukraine, who was pushing for neutrality. And so you can see that, if you look at the history and go back and look at that open page ad, you can see how we got to where we are now. We had no empathy for Russia's national security interests. And it led us to where we are now because Ukraine was going to be the red line of us if we admitted Ukraine into NATO. And so that's where we got to where we are now. And if your audience will take a look at that, in fact, it's also on our Eisenhower Media Network site, which Anastasia, I'm sure, will probably list as she's done in the past. Also, I would like to mention, as we talk about Ukraine and Russia, what's important now as well is what's going on in the Middle East. Ray mentioned something about Obama and Syria. If you look at what Israel is doing right now, they're bombing Syria as we speak. They're bombing Lebanon, and worse, as we all know, a few days ago, 400,000 individuals were killed in Gaza, which is just disastrous. I keep asking myself, what are we going to bomb next? There's nothing left. As Marcia mentioned a few minutes ago, we've destroyed, and I say we because the United States is complicit in that. We have destroyed Gaza. There's no more infrastructure left. It only leads me to believe that we're trying to kill as many Palestinians as possible, and that is very unfortunate. Now, there is some good news, I always tell folks it's a battle for me. My goal is to educate as many folks as possible. And as I started to allude to, Ray mentioned something about Obama and his role with the neocons. I wrote about that in a book, Daily Betrayal. Obama made two mistakes. One being blurbing out Assad must go at the time. Assad must go. Like we have the right just to go in and remove, which we do try to do, any government we so desire. The next mistake he made was his red line to bomb Syria at the time would be if chemical weapons were introduced into Syria. And guess what? False flag. Chemical weapons later was introduced into Syria. And that led to push by the neocons to push Obama into bombing Syria, which he was able to defend that off. But the neocons worked very hard here in the United States of America to try to get us involved on behalf of Israel, bombing every country that they see or a threat to Israel. Now, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There was a Gallup poll, I'm sure some of you are probably aware of, about 2 weeks ago that mentioned since the last 25 years, the decline of the U.S. support of Israel among the American people is at its worst in 25 years. And so as I get frustrated quite often thinking, are we making a difference? Well, I can tell you here in the United States, as we've been isolated because the world knows what's going on, I am beginning to see a difference and support of the Palestinian plight. Because I must tell you, you don't know what you don't know. I have this battle personally with family and friends who don't understand the Palestinian plight. I mean, the Israeli lobby has done a great messaging campaign in the United States of America to withhold the plight of the Palestinian people. But that is changing thanks to social media, thanks to the Schilling Institute, and thanks to all the organization that is helping and understand what's happening in Palestine and the history of the Palestinian people's fight against oppression and against the taking of their land. And so I am once again happy to be a part of this and willing to answer any questions that I may be able to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis Fritz, for that, for going through that. And yeah, no, we definitely need more activity in what our organization and groupings here have been doing. I'd like to jump over to Dennis Small quickly for a report. Dennis, do we have you on?
Yeah, I'm on.
Yeah.
You want to do this before we go to the Q&A session in general?
Why don't you do that? Because I'd like to go back and have a discussion with the panelists.
Okay, very good. Yeah, let me do this now quickly, and I apologize. It is not the case that you have to be called Dennis to be called on in this meeting. I've denied that, but I'm going to have to hop back over and help out with interpreting. I wanted to give you a quick report from Carolina Dominguez of Mexico. She's one of the Schiller Institute's youth leaders, which she had wanted to inform people about. However, she is tied up this morning at a meeting at a university in Mexico City. And I will show you where she and a number of Schiller Institute organizers are right now. I think you'll be able to see that on your screen. This is at one of the smaller universities in Mexico City, one of the welfare universities, so-called, set up by former President Lopez Obrador, because the large universities of Mexico are just incapable of handling all the youth wanting a university education. The last time I looked at it, the National University of Mexico, the UNAM, had over 250,000 students. So it's the size of a decent sized city. In any event, this is at the Ixtapalapa campus of this university. It is 140 people, largely from the hydraulic engineering department of the university. That's what they're studying. And the presentation that was given by the Schiller Institute organizers was on, quote, hydraulic projects in strategic development zones. And they, as you can see, this matches exactly the topic we're discussing today. And they did also, if they were able to get the logistics worked out, show the Oasis Plan video, dubbed into Spanish, of course, that the Schiller Institute prepared and have shown here before. So this discussion is going on in Mexico City. There will also be, and this is the report I wanted to get, operational report to you. There will be later this afternoon at 5 p.m. Washington time, a discussion among youth in various universities across Iberoamerica, Spanish-speaking youth, because of the crucial importance of youth to determine what the Earth's next 50 years are going to be, as Linda LaRouche put it in one of his major works. This will be sponsored at the Technological Institute of Querétaro. A couple of university classes will be there at the university. We expect anywhere from 100 to 200 students. And there will also be professors and students present, connected in from a half a dozen other Ibero-American countries and Africa as well, for the purpose of spreading this process of taking the issue of the need for a new security and development architecture out to the youth of the world, to concentrate then on the May 24th, 25th conference of the Schiller Institute in the New York City area, which will be held addressing these strategic issues. We expect to have, and we have confirmations that there will be participation this afternoon at that meeting, along with youth, by Fernando Garzon, who you just heard from, who from Ecuador is, among other things, a university professor. And we have as well professors and students from Argentina, Dominican Republic, Bolivia, Brazil, Nicaragua, and the Bronx, which is not properly in Iberoamerica, but Jose Vega will be on with us as well. And also some professors and students from Equatorial Guinea, which is an African country, and it is a Spanish-speaking African country. So just to give you an idea of the kind of outreach and organizing work, which we in the Schiller Institute consider to be absolutely essential to bring about, to put the political muscle and especially getting the youth involved in the kinds of development discussion topics we've raised today. That's what I wanted to inform people about.
Excellent. I think that's a great example of what many of us can be doing right now. Thank you for that, Dennis. We are going to be switching over to the discussion period in a moment. But I wanted to ask before we made that transition if Marcia or Fernando Garzon or Helga again, if any of you have any responses thus far.
Sí, no sé si me permiten.
Could we ask Fernando
I'm
to
sorry.
please wait until I can switch over to the interpreting side? Please,
Oh, I'm
give-
sorry, one moment.
Give me a minute.
Okay.
Please
Oh,
call
man,
on someone else
por
from
favor.
Anastasia. This will take about
Okay. Maybe Marcia, you have a response to anyone thus far.
No, I'll fill in gladly, though, to indulge, everyone can indulge me on a personal reaction. Isn't it great that this Mexico briefing on hydraulic projects in strategic areas, that's just what we, as it happens, went through today with the selected illustrated projects I showed. But I do think I'm speaking for EIR.news, EIR Weekly, that briefings, I'm not talking about elaborate classes or everything else, is exactly the kind of thing we could proliferate around the world. We have, we may be limited in numbers, but we are expanding in impact, all of us. And as you, Anastasia, Helga, and other people have said, Dennis Fritz has implied, I mean, we have an unbelievable blitz education job to do. I'm from Pennsylvania. Benjamin Franklin set up a weekly meeting called the Junto. That's how we pronounce it there, everyone. And I think that we have to have a version of that today. And the Mexico situation shows what we can do. And that's just a reaction of mine. Thank you.
Excellent. So please go ahead, Professor Garzon. We have interpretation again.
Bien. Gracias. Sí, quería complementar algo.
Thank you very much. I wanted to complement what Dennis already said, Dennis Fritz said. There are certain crucial aspects which involved in reconstruction, as we've said. Necessarily, you have to have a systemic approach to planification of reconstruction. For example, a crucial element, you can't plan based on political borders. This is the division into countries and states and so on. This has countries that have their own borders based by law and so on. But planning also requires looking at the borders of the ecosystem, what nature itself has done. Nature hasn't established borders, but it's based on nature itself. So in that regard, all of the areas of natural resources, access to such riches, has to have a global territorial view, an integral approach to this. So therefore, reconstruction, be limited to what are borders, political bases, Gaza, and others. This is a nonsensical approach. We have to have a total integral approach to this. So another point, no planning. If we're talking about actual reconstruction, you can't assume that it's going to be short term. In fact, all planning has to have as a time horizon a much longer term. And where we have great conflicts, big economic conflicts, planning is a little bit like private planning by businessmen, by oil producers. They don't think in terms of a year, 2 years, or periods of elections, but they plan and think in the long term. So when you plan for the population in a territorial area, you also have to plan for the long term. That's to say, have reconstruction with looking at the broadest regional approaches, and perhaps it will not have an immediate result. And if you restrict it to geographical borders, this could be a limitation to what you can actually achieve in global development prospects. Finally, I would like to issue an invitation to you, which is the process of planning, or rather the role that the population plays in this. In fact, in the final analysis, planning depends on the role of the people and of the institutions of the people and of actions that they may take. So therefore, I invite you on April 12th, organizations from many parts of the world through the Palestinian House of Aragon in Spain has brought a number of organizations together from parts of Latin America to have a peaceful protest before the institutional offices, representations of the United States to support the dynamic of resolving the catastrophe in Gaza and to bring about a true peace, a sustainable development approach. And we invite you all to be part of that process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Garzon. Okay, well, we are going to be going to the general discussion with everyone who's participating, which is somewhere around 200 plus people, plus whoever is on the YouTube and Rumble and whatever other platforms are playing this video at the moment. If you'd like to join the discussion period, please go to the schillerinstitute.com website. And you'll find right on the top of the page the RSVP registration page. And you must be registered to be part of the dialogue with the speakers today. But once you register, you'll get the Zoom link and you'll be able to participate. And with that, Dave, just let me know when we've cut the stream.